The very last video lecture I'm going to do is on chapter 22 of Living in the Environment, which focuses on urbanization, so cities and their role in Earth sustainability. This will be a slightly shorter chapter, but it's important to note and could be very useful to you in your sustainable city design project at the end of this year. So, urbanization is the creation and growth of urban and suburban areas, and we measure this as a percent of people in a country living in either an urban or a suburban area. The rate of increase in these populations associated with births, but also with immigration, where people will come to locations with urban areas and move to cities because of the available jobs, food, housing, healthcare opportunities, etc. And so, cities first emerged about 6,000 years ago. Rome first reached a population of 1 million in 133 BC. And since that time, areas have continued to increase. Sometimes they go up, sometimes they go down, depending on trends, but the overall trend has obviously been to increase. Today, half the world's population now lives in an urban area, and that's about 80% of Americans live in urban areas. You are one of them. There are 18 megacities or metropolises defined as a city with more than 10 million people. Unsurprisingly, most of these locations are in China and India, where we see the highest populations in the world. Here in the United States, Los Angeles and New York would count as megacities. And we can sort of see their change in growth as associated with color. And this shouldn't come as a shock to you if you think about population growth back when we looked at Unit 4 and talked about population in different parts of the world, that some of this growth happened early on. In the black circle, we see the population up to 1950. Some of this growth happened pre change in century, so in the 2000s we saw an estimate, and then a lot of the population growth has happened since then in red in areas where we've seen exponential population growth around the world, such as China and India. Between 1800 and 2018, the percentage of US population living in cities was only 5%, and it rose to about 80%. So we have greatly urbanized in a very short amount of time. People migrated from rural areas, then people left cities to go to suburbs. Many migrated to the Northeast to be in sort of the New York metropolitan area or the Southwest, coming to the Los Angeles metropolitan area. And both of these regions have seen a level of urban sprawl, or growth of low-density development at the edges of cities and towns, promoted by available land, lower costs of gasoline, the introduction of the U.S. interstate highway system, different zoning laws as they've changed over time. But a lot of urban sprawl is associated with lack of urban planning. And so that can lead to some pretty serious issues. We can see that our water issues are disrupted, access to human health and overall aesthetics of the area can be unplanned and not be great. Biodiversity loss is certainly a huge issue, whether it's ecosystems or even individual species. And these urban regions tend to be areas of high energy use, high air pollution, etc. Now, cities are great. They're economic centers. They have tons of industry. They have jobs. They have transportation. They have access to medical care, education, and more social services. But obviously, they have a lot of disadvantages as well. We tend to see more water quality issues in urban areas. We tend to see more health problems associated with air pollution in urban areas. Noise pollution is also an issue, and light pollution are also issues. And we actually see cities causing microclimate effects, such as urban heat areas. So we have to really think about the ecological footprint of urban areas as a disadvantage. One of the causes of this is poverty. Urban areas with high poverty often go underdeveloped or poorly developed. Your textbook will talk about slums or shanty towns on the outskirts of cities. We see these here in the United States, but in some of the Asian mega cities, we see them far more frequently. And the housing has sort of been built without a lot of regulation because the population has grown so fast, so quickly, that they essentially will build houses out of materials that they find available. But, there's no real planning in terms of road system, sanitation systems, garbage collection systems, electricity, etc. And these regions, tend to evolve when you have a really rapid population growth in a very short amount of time. People need to live somewhere. They're going to live somewhere. They're going to build a place for themselves and their families to live. But the lack of planning leads to environmental issues. Brazil and Peru in recent years have started to recognize these as legal settlements and are actually granting legal titles to this land and the people that are inhabiting it. There's a great case study in your textbook on areas like this in Mexico City, which I recommend you check out if you have some time. There's two types of cities, those that are compact, which basically grow vertically, and those that are dispersed, that'll grow more horizontally. New York, being sort of stuck on the island of Manhattan and nearby regions, is a compact city. Dispersed city would be something like Los Angeles. Within a city, as you know, because you live here, you have to rely on either a personal motor vehicle or access to mass transit or an alternative form of transit, whether it's walking, biking, etc. And if your city has done a lot of planning, you can have a really nice transportation system that's going to meet the needs of most of your population. But if your population has grown so fast and so quickly that urban planning couldn't be done, we tend to see really poor transportation and really difficult problems with the ability for people to get around easily in their own urban area. So we are trying in most parts of the world to discourage personal motor vehicle use and instead switch to public transit or alternative transit, like zip cars, bike systems, rail systems, buses, etc. So when you are designing your city, you should think about what are the modes or methods of transportation that are going to be most sustainable for whatever city that you're designing. If we have time and could actually take time to build from the ground up, we take time to do something called land use planning. We determine, okay, what is the best present and future use of a particular region of land? We want to encourage economic growth, we want to reduce environmental impacts, and we want to have the best social consequences possible. In most cities, this looks like zoning, where we'll designate land for a specific use. Is it a commercial region? Is it a residential region? Is it mixed commercial or residential? And that can be used to really control growth and protect specific areas. We also may set regions aside that are going to be green regions and are going to be devoted to public use space like parks or waterfront areas. And if we have the chance to do something like smart growth, we can encourage environmentally sustainable development of these locations and really direct sprawl to certain areas and reduce the amount of waste or pollution that we're having in certain regions. So Portland, Oregon is a good case study for smart growth and urban land use planning. Obviously, if populations are rising really dramatically in a really short amount of time, this gets harder and harder for officials to do because the needs of the populace are going to outpace the rate of planning that a local or municipal government can do. In some areas, we're starting to see more cluster development where houses are going to be sort of closer together, but that leaves green regions available for open, shared outdoor spaces. And we talked about some sustainable cities in Europe and in Asia that are coming online because they've been designed from the ground up to meet the needs of a local population and do so in a sustainable way. So I would take some time to research these locations. I've given you a list of them on your assignment. Vaab in Germany, for example, is a good example of that. We're also designing our buildings to be more green with organizations like LEED, or the Leadership in Energy Environmental Design, which is a green certification program for buildings. We're seeing that as we develop new urban areas, there is a push to make those areas more sustainable, or at least slightly more environmental friendly, with certification programs, with land use planning programs, etc.